So today we have Rushali Patil here with us, and she was last at Salesforce for 14 years, and we're going to be talking about scaling engineering teams. She's just joined a startup. I won't break the news. I'll let her do that. So my first question is, what's the startup you joined, and what's the story behind why you left Salesforce after 14 years and decided to join this little startup?
Thanks, Hiten. Happy to do that. Yeah, so currently I'm at Front. I've been there for all of 5 weeks. I'm head of platform. And yeah, it's a very interesting story about how I decided to join Front. So after 14 years at Salesforce, I was looking for a change of context, looking for a change of pace, and I was talking to startups, but not quite finding the match. And then one day, I came across an article that was written by our CEO, Mathilde, where she had published the Series C deck that she gave to the investors. And I thought it was quite interesting to just put out your Series C deck. I was like, isn't the company afraid about competitors? Like, aren't they giving out their secret sauce? And so I dug some more, and then I discovered that she also put out her Series B deck and the Series A deck. And so that intrigued me. I went to the company website and discovered that transparency is one of the core values at Front. And so her putting out the deck was just living up to that core value. Apart from transparency, there was collaboration, low ego, care, high standards, and all these were values that really resonated with me. And I hadn't met a single person at Front. I didn't know if they had an opening, but I thought this could be the next place for me. I just got lucky after that. I got introduced to the company, and they had a role, and we got going. So here I am 5 weeks in.
We're supposed to talk about scaling engineering teams, and immediately, right when you bring up that topic, most people are wondering, how do I hire engineers? And I know before this, as we were talking about what we should talk about, we had some specific opinions that we very much aligned on there. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about, okay, you saw a lot at Salesforce over 14 years and a tremendous amount of growth in headcount and other things. And now you're kind of head of platform over at Front. How do you think about it coming from Salesforce and now to Front? Is it hiring that you think about first, or is it something else? I know the answer, but let's make sure everyone else hears your perspective on that.
Yeah, and the way we do scaling at Salesforce, I think we do it the same way at Front. And hiring is not the first thing that comes to mind, believe it or not. Hiring is part of the story. I think there are these other aspects that don't get discussed as much, which is the planning phase, getting buy-in from your existing team. How do you now operate the organization at the larger scale? How do you onboard and hire during a pandemic era? Like, all these are things that don't get discussed as much, and I would love to talk about those today.
Sounds good. So usually when someone joins a company in a senior role like yours and now has all of a sudden, almost overnight, a ton of responsibility, which I'm sure you can handle, they come up with like a 30, 60, 90-day sort of plan or something similar. I'd love to know, before even that, or even as part of that, if this makes sense to you, how did you think about assessing the current situation at Front to figure out what you want to do? And not just how do you make it yours, so to speak, but how do you figure out, like, this is the situation we're in now, and these are the things I need to be doing going forward, and how that relates to the goals that you've kind of been brought on to achieve?
Yeah, so, with Front, what I should say is that it's a company that has a product market fit and is going through like a hyper growth phase. And what I thought I could bring in is, through my experience at Salesforce and seeing that grow through sort of a high growth phase, was just the experience that came in, not just from the hiring and the scaling, but also from the execution and from sort of having that trigger to continuously deliver on milestones. And the other part of it was just to be able to create a collaborative environment as you brought in all these new people into the environment and sort of got them going.
Are you thinking about, for example, the code first, the team first, the processes that the organization uses to ship product? What is your kind of starting point, and how do you kind of evolve that as you kind of learn more? The reason I'm asking this is when folks tend to join companies, especially after such an illustrious background as yours and such a long tenure, you've got opinions, of course, and you've got ideas, and they might not always be the same as what's going on at the company today. So I'm just curious how you sort of thought of that planning and how you kind of came in and are starting to integrate yourself into kind of this much smaller company, obviously one that does have product market fit, which is always a great time to join a company once they have product market fit and have been going for a while. So just curious on how you think about kind of the phasing and the structure as you come in. I know it's only been 5 weeks, but I'm sure you've got a plan.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always people first. Like for me, it's really important to build the relations, not just with my peers, but the engineers who report to me. And so my emphasis has been on building out those relations. The second part is the processes. And right now I'm pretty much in observation mode where I'm seeing how things are done, trying to make notes on what could be done better, but not made any changes. And I think those changes will come in gradually as I get more absorbed into the organization. At Salesforce, I was lucky enough to be an engineer for 4 years. So I really understood the technical stack there. I don't have the luxury of doing that here. And I'm coming in from a very high level. And so one of the things I do is I allocate time every week to do some level of sort of time spent with the engineers, either understanding the architecture or listening to one of those recorded sessions. Because as a senior leader at a startup, it's really important that you understand how things operate at the ground level and really have a good understanding of the technology so that you can make the right decisions as you go along.
You mentioned earlier about kind of the pandemic. And I don't think we can have a conversation about teams or business at this point without talking about it. Has anything changed? What's changed? How do you think about it now that we're kind of deeper into it, whether it's the recruiting side or internal kind of folks and the way you're doing one-on-ones, whatever it may be? Would love to hear what changes have happened and what you've started doing about them.
Let me tell you, and not too long ago I was interviewing, so I know how hard it is to be giving interviews sitting in your bedroom. And we at Front fully acknowledge that. It's really hard to be interviewing candidates in the pandemic era when you can't meet them face to face. And we've just accepted that challenge. One of the things we do is that we actually use our product pretty effectively in order to reach out to candidates. So when we are working with external candidates, the entire team, the hiring manager, the recruiting team is all on the email conversation, even if the email goes out from a single recruiter. And so when the candidate asks a question around role or interview process, like all of us will sort of be collaborating in the app to come up with the apt response. And so all the shared email drafts, the comments, the SLAs that we have ensure that the external candidate has the right sort of experience as we are interviewing them or hiring them. And then the other part is we have an amazing recruiting team that really makes sure that they create enough touch points all along the way virtually with the candidate so that the candidate feels like like he is being taken care of, he or she. And so all along, if the candidate has been made an offer and is mulling over multiple offers, they let us know. So we reach out and we ask the candidate if there are any questions we could help answer. Or if the candidate has accepted the offer, frontiers across the company will reach out to the candidate and congratulate them. And so I think this creates that sort of feeling of being welcome even before they have joined the company. And that is just the hiring process. We also, for the onboarding, are fairly mindful about doing it in a way where we make the candidate feel welcome as they are sort of coming in through the company doors virtually. I think just like hiring, onboarding is incredibly hard when the candidate cannot sort of walk through the doors and feel the company and the environment of the company. And so one thing we do is the hiring manager, the onboarding buddies, and the people ops team are all in like lockstep from day one. We make sure that by the time the new hire comes in, the training material, there's a customized onboarding plan, there's a 30, 60, 90-day plan. There are all these recorded sessions, all those are provided to the candidate so that they are successful. And then beyond that, there is like the sheer willingness of people to like jump on a Zoom call if you have anything that you need. We also have a really good sort of philosophy towards onboarding, and I'll give you an example. We have this person called Jeremy on the team who does a lot of onboarding at Front. And what he says to candidate is that I will meet you for 30 minutes every single day until you're onboarded, and that could be for a month or 2 months. That's like an amazing amount of dedication. And what he says to new hires is that every day I expect you to ask me some questions. If you don't ask me questions, there's something wrong. And creating that kind of non-judgmental atmosphere for new hires so that they feel sort of welcome and feel free to ask questions really, is a unique way to do it in these times.
I really love that. I think that so many companies could use just even that inspiration of how do you kind of treat the candidate through the whole life cycle, even before they join the company, before they've accepted the offer, after they've accepted the offer, and then having a really thoughtful experience after, because it's their first impression of the company across that whole experience. It's different first impressions depending on what stage they're at. So I think that's very impressive, and it's nice that when a company uses their own product. I would love to understand kind of how you personally think about things like one-on-ones, things like making sure that you're actually able to sort of scale the engineering methodology or the engineering ethos, because I know that no two companies have the same exact engineering process, or are evolving their engineering process continuously. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that evolution being at Salesforce and now being at Front. How do you think about those things? Because really, like scaling engineering, yes, it is all about people, absolutely, but without the processes in place and those systematic things, which I'm sure you have many of them, nothing happens, work doesn't get done.
So, it's interesting coming from a big company, you feel like you have this toolkit of all these things that have worked really well at a big company. And when you go to a small company, I think the first instinct is to just pull out these things, and start applying them. And I think that's a mistake because the small companies operate in a much smaller context. The problems are there, but also the volume of those problems is a lot lower than what you see at big companies. So that level of chaos is not there yet. And so what you want to do is you want to be very mindful when you're introducing processes. And the first thing you want to do is you want to first of all observe and make sure that there are actual problems that need to be solved. And as you're introducing processes, you want to make sure that you're making tiny tweaks and seeing how they work and then introducing. Like you don't want to make big bang changes all of a sudden, which will just disrupt the existing organization. And so my emphasis has been on that, on making like smaller changes, seeing how they go, and then sort of propelling those forward. I think the other thing is when you think about processes, you want to do things where it's just enough for the organization, just enough to solve the current problem. And then sort of as you go, then solve the next level problem. You don't want to over-engineer it too much because then that can again disrupt the flow and the way in which things go. Usually at startups, there is a certain amount, how should I say, an amount of flexibility in how things are done. People take on different responsibilities, they wear different hats. And that's one of the reasons why startups succeed. And you don't want to take all that magic out and just introduce like a lot of rigor everywhere to make things efficient.
You sound like the perfect person that should be at a startup. Not everyone would say that in the role you're in with the approach. I really appreciate that way of thinking about it. So as you kind of get into Front and start kind of settling in, it's been 5 weeks. So I'm sure startups move fast. So I'm sure you're getting your bearings really quickly. What I'm curious about is what are some of the kind of pandemic, non-pandemic, et cetera, kind of challenges that you see when it comes to scaling the team? And maybe this is a good time for us to actually talk about recruiting and kind of anything that you kind of think through around that in terms of sort of the top of funnel, if you want to call it that, of recruiting, because I know that's a question that we have to answer in some way when we're talking about scaling engineering teams.
For us, because we have a very strong emphasis on people and culture, for us, referrals is a very strong sort of signal for us to bring in people. But beyond that, what we look for when we are looking for people on LinkedIn are people who can, who are from environments where we feel they can operate the same way at Front. They are from companies which have a similar philosophy, so to speak. And we just want to make sure that in trying to hire people, we don't lose that part where we completely end up changing the culture because we bring in people who operate in a very different mode. But it's pretty much, using LinkedIn to bring in the resources. And then from there, we make sure there's everyone on the team to look at the resumes and sort of go through the initial chats and the phone screens. And we try to make it as sort of as easy for the candidate as is possible. So we keep the round short. We try to accommodate their schedules and sort of be as flexible as we can, given that we are interviewing candidates.
The one thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking about the recruiting is basically when our head of engineering at my company kind of wants to make changes, what we've learned is to focus on the org chart and figure out where are we today, who are the people that are in place, what does it look like, and then create a new org chart that includes those people and then moves them around to the places we think they need to be, and then has empty spots for all the people that are not there yet. That's our process.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, whether you align with that or not, I would love to dive deeper into whatever your process is on how do you actually think about, here's where we are from a headcount standpoint. Obviously, you know what milestones you want to accomplish, and then is that a process you use? How do you think about all those kinds of things?
Absolutely. And, having done this a few times at Salesforce, this is what comes to mind the minute people talk about scaling. It's a whiteboard and a marker. And this is how we did it. I would go into a room with my peers, and on the whiteboard, we would say, okay, what's our North Star? Where do we need to be in the next 12 to 18 months? And then we would draw out our sort of entire org. And as you map out the org, just the way you were describing, you start to see which are the teams where you need to hire, where are the gaps in the skill set, where are the teams that you need to surge on, which are the teams that you can collapse. And along the way, what you're also doing is making sure you're aligning all the product areas and you're refining charters. You're making sure every team has an exciting charter. And then, of course, there are going to be existing people whom you can level up and sort of, have them take on roles that they wouldn't otherwise have opportunity to take on. And so after that exercise, you get sort of your blueprint, your hiring plan, and you take that and then sort of start executing on it.
That's awesome. Yeah, very well aligned with how we think about it. You mentioned this idea of a charter.
Yeah.
Can you dig a little deeper into that for anyone listening to explain kind of what a charter is and how you might come up with one for a specific team or something like that?
Yeah, so charters are typically, I would say 12 months. It used to be 18 months at Salesforce, but startups, I think 12 months is a long time. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that every team has an area where they feel a sense of ownership that they can sort of drive on their own. They're empowered to own or make all the decisions in that area. And it's exciting. It's something challenging. It's something that will stretch the team. There's another aspect of the charter that you remember, which is, every team and every organization has technical debt. And that's something that will be part of every team. But you don't want to saddle one team with technical debt and have one team that is doing everything new. For every team that you have in your org, you usually want to balance the amount of technical debt that they're handling with something exciting that they can look forward to. And keep it balanced across.
You're using some of my magic words and ones that I just want to poke into. I'm sure we could do this for quite some time. One of the kind of final areas that you kind of inspired with a couple words you said there is tech debt. Mm-hmm. And it's something you and I talked about earlier, and I mentioned some strategies that we're using, and you did the same. I would love to hear just anything you have to say about tech debt. I think it is personally one of the biggest challenges in every organization that's trying to build even a small piece of software for themselves, because if you have tech debt, it is the thing that can prevent you from shipping the right thing to customers on time or fast enough, and thus you can lose the market really easily if you're just drowning in tech debt. So I would just love to hear it, even for my own benefit. I don't care if anyone else benefits after all your experience. Tech debt. Obviously, what it is, well, you can explain that if you want, but anything you want to share about tech debt, I would love to learn from you.
Yeah, so the way I think about tech debt is a loan that you need to repay. And so you can keep the loan, but eventually you have to realize you have to start paying down the loan. And I think the best way to do it is to keep it balanced, like to not let it sort of go to like crazy levels where now you're causing instability in the platform. And so what you want to ideally be doing is keep chipping away at it and keep making sort of changes all along. You also want to distribute the technical debt, and you want to make sure every team has a sense of ownership for the tech debt that they have in their area. And so sort of being mindful of it is, I think, one way to do it. There are times in previous roles where it got out of hand, and when those things happened, we actually took a break from building features, and we dedicated a period of time to just get back to the levels that we wanted. But I just feel like staying on top of it is the best way to sort of deal with it.
I would love to hear your thoughts on how you think about at Front. all the integrations you're now managing, all the things you have to do, whatever perspective you want to share along those lines, because I believe that every company is going to need to integrate with other tools for the sake of the customer and the workflow that the customer has. And I know Front is really big on that and is built on key integrations with email. And so would love to hear your thoughts on how you think about the APIs and all these partners and kind of how your approach is to sort of working with these APIs, having your team work with them, and then working with some of these organizations too that you're integrating with.
Yeah, and I think there was no better place to learn about that than Salesforce. I think one of the reasons, Salesforce is successful for many reasons, but I think one of the reasons was very early on Salesforce realized that they couldn't build every product on top of the platform. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to empower all these other third-party vendors to do it for them. And so very early on in the company, we had this concept of App Exchange. And the whole idea was you provide all these APIs and you let your third-party vendors build products on top of the platform. There was also another very important change that we made, where at one point we said every API that our third-party vendors use would be the same API that we use internally. And that created a level of rigor that sort of didn't exist before at the company, where we used our own APIs every single day to build our products so that we understood what pain points our third-party vendors would have if they tried to build the same sort of products. And that was a really good sort of move that we made at an early stage in the company. And I think at Front, it would be similar. I think we sort of live in a world where we are part of an ecosystem. We are not at these silos or islands where we can exist on our own. And I think that realization means that you have to build out the APIs, the SDKs, and create the integration so that other products can coexist with you. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about my role at Front is that we're getting into that phase. We're building out all these APIs, we're doing these integrations, and there's going to be a big emphasis on Front, at Front to be doing that.
Awesome. So I've got one final question, and this is a question I love to ask in almost every type of interview, whether it's a customer interview or some other kind of interview. So bear with me. My question is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have? And can you please answer that? And if not, I'll come up with one last question. So if you don't have that, I'll definitely come up with one last question.
I do. I think there's one thing that we didn't touch upon, which unfortunately is something that's very it exists. It's unfortunate or fortunate, but it's a part and parcel of scaling, and that's reorgs. And I think it's very important to treat reorgs the right way. The best reorgs are the ones that are done swiftly, but with care. When reorgs go wrong, it's not because of the reorg, but because of the way it was done. 2 weeks after I joined Front, we went through a major reorg. And, we knew what we had to do. We were going to make the change all at one time. However, there's a lot of effort and thought and orchestration that went into ensuring that whoever was impacted, whichever engineers, manager was changing or charter was changing, we reached out to them one-on-one and made sure that they were okay with the change. We made sure that they had a space to ask questions. And that's important. You do it with care so that people don't feel sidelined and don't feel left out. And you kind of want to make sure that they are part of the process. And then even after that, after the announcement was made, our leaders went and they had Ask Me Anything sessions. They had sent out emails, pulse checks, a tremendous amount of effort into making sure that everyone was aligned with the changes that we were making. And so that's one thing to sort of, it comes with scaling and one thing to remember about.
That topic of reorgs is one of the best ways to end this conversation. I'm glad that you mentioned that, and you're right. That's a big thing when it comes to scaling engineering teams. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for showing up today and sharing your insights about scaling engineering teams. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.